I'd first like to acknowledge that Joe and I, everyone here, we are meeting you all here on the traditional lands of the Gadigal, Bidjigal and Birrabirragal clans, who traditionally lived on the Sydney coast. We would like to pay our respects to elders past, present and future, and extend this respect to all First Nations people living, working or visiting this area. Thank you for joining us here in the bookstore, you lucky humans, and on Zoom, not too shabby. Tonight we have viewers streaming in from around the world, across Australia. We've got people that have driven up and flown in for this in the shop, so it's very exciting. Thank you everyone for being here. And of course, thank you so much to Jane, Kate and Jordan and the whole team at Gertrude and Alice for hosting this event physically, virtually, emotionally, spiritually, because making events happen these days is really epic, as we all know.
Thank you, Jane.
We're going to start tonight. I'm going to interview Joe, and then we're going to save some time for audience questions. That's from you guys here and on Zoom. If you have questions, just pop them in the chat. And Jordan here, he's monitoring the chat, and he will collect all the good questions. So feel free to put them in.
Yeah, only ask good questions.
Yeah, only good questions. Now, if you're here, please make sure your phone's switched off to silence. And yeah, I want to jot down any questions if you can't remember them during the night. I understand. And just relax and enjoy. It's quite a thrill to be at an actual event, isn't it? Yes. Okay. So, Joanne Fedler.
Hello, Miriam.
Hello. I'm going to do your bio. Unless you want to do it. No. Yeah, I do have to. Is the internationally best-selling author of 12 books, which have been translated into many different languages and have sold over 750,000 copies worldwide. She is a Fulbright scholar, has a master's degree in law from Yale, set up and ran an advocacy centre to end violence against women in South Africa, and has spent her life fighting for women's rights. She was selected as one of the women for the book 200 Women Who Will Change the Way You See the World. More recently, her book Things Without a Name has recently been optioned for the screen, and as a writing mentor, she offers writing retreats for women all over the world, as well as online writing courses. Please give a big round of applause. And my first question, how are you feeling?
I'm really excited. It's been a very long time since I've actually launched a book and, you know, done any of this kind of public stuff. So I'm excited, and my God, this book felt like it took forever. So I'm just so happy that it is in the world and that I can be talking about it rather than trying to keep writing it. It's just a great relief, and it's really wonderful. I mean, looking around me, the people that have come physically, there are people who've driven and flown all over to just be in this tiny little gathering. I'm sort of quite moved, really, and looking at all the names of the people who've tuned in from all over the world. I have to say, there is something really beautiful about having a launch and having people from all over the world being able to be here. It's the first time, and that's kind of a gift of this whole new way of doing things.
I agree. Yes. Now, I wanted to start with the title, which I know there's a story to it, and we'll get to the story, but I also wanted to tell you, I just thought I'd Google the word unbecoming.
Mm-hmm.
And this is Google Dictionary.
Mm-hmm.
Adjective, especially of clothing or of a colour not flattering, a stout lady in an unbecoming striped sundress. And then for Merriam-Webster, not according with the standards appropriate to one's position or condition of life.
Right. Absolutely. That is exactly. Well, I mean, that was part of the whole sort of context of having a word that has all got this whole historical baggage attached to it, you know, to be an unbecoming woman. I mean, what does that even mean, you know? So I love the fact that this word had all of these different permutations. But the story of this book is that it was not called Unbecoming for just about the whole time that I was writing it. It was called The Sabbatical. That was the title that came to me when I started working on it 3 years ago, and we even printed a couple of copies of the originals with that title. And in fact, it was one of the one of the readers, Katerina Cosgrove, who's a wonderful writer whom I sent it to for an endorsement, who read the book and came back to me and said, listen, this is not a very sexy title, and it really doesn't do justice to the content of the book. It is much more than about a woman in a marriage who goes on a sabbatical from her life. And so we started a discussion about what could be a title that would fit in. And I have my sort of inner female circle of people who whose brains I lent on, and we eventually came up with, it was going to be called The Unbecoming, and then Katerina said, just drop the and make it Unbecoming. And I, for the longest time as well, I couldn't feel that this book was called Unbecoming, because I'd had it in my head saved as the sabbatical, for so long. It was like a neural pathway in my brain. But I have to say, when I really fell in love with the title was when I saw the cover of the book, and the way that the book designer had taken this word and literally broken it down into these parts, which is really what the story is about. It's about a woman who is breaking apart in her life, and nothing is fitting, and she's not one thing, she's not one word, she's not a thing. There's no label, there's no description of who she is, but yet, I mean, the sculptural nature of this word that takes up this whole page in a way also does what this, what the title does. So yeah, sorry.
So what does, no, that's good. What does the title mean then?
For a very long time, when you have children, you are forever being and becoming their mother. It feels like this kind of endless thing that you're doing, and it's a role, it's a responsibility, it's a burden, it's a joy, it's all of these things, and you're becoming this thing, and you're becoming a mother, and your children are growing up and becoming and becoming and becoming. And then you reach a certain point, which is the point of time when this book takes place, which is where I find myself now, which is midlife, post 50, kind of empty nesting. And one of my favorite writers, James Hollis, says, what you have become is now your chief obstacle. Everything that you have tried to be, your career, your successes, your marriage, whatever it is that you have tried to be, as you are accumulating this identity and you're formulating and shaping yourself around it, you are also creating a problem for yourself, because that is then what you now have to overcome. And so this mother, this loving mother of these children, is now my obstacle, because I now have to overcome that, to unbecome that, and become something else. And it's a dismantling, it's a breaking apart, it is a revisioning, it is a birth, it's full of grief and joy, and it is the most mottled, liberating, terrifying, sizzling, burning feeling that I have ever experienced in my life. And I guess that feeling of just sort of everything falling apart is how it feels. And there is so much sadness and so much excitement at the same time in unbecoming who I became or thought I was.
And I was looking at the years between the three, because this is a trilogy.
Yes.
And this is probably the longest time that you had in between. Right. Well, it is. It's longer than between Secret Mothers and the reunion.
Sort of, yeah. There were sort of 7 years between the first one and the second one, and then about probably 8 or 9 between the second. Yeah.
And was that always like 10, in your vision, firstly to have the 3 and then to end in midlife? Was that?
No, I had no plans. No plans. I mean, Secret Mother's Business was its own bizarre success, based on a night that I had with a group of girlfriends, some of whom are in the audience here, and some of whom are tuned in here, where 8 of us got together. We were mothers of young children. We took a night away from our husbands and our children. We drank a lot, we ate a lot, and we told a lot of really sort of damning truths about motherhood. And that book was its own thing. And because it was such a kind of ridiculously inexplicable success in Germany, like sold 500,000 copies, like it was like, oh my God, nerve touched, I think. And so then I thought, well, it would be worth writing a sequel to that at a later stage. And I have to say, I do find motherhood a very interesting thing to write about anyway. It's been really the centrifugal force of my whole life. I haven't really done much else. So writing about motherhood at that stage also brought all its challenges. So the reunion came out, and also some of my girlfriends here, we got together, we had a weekend away, and we explored some of the, you know, the experiences of being at that point. And then that book did okay. It sold about 80,000 copies in Germany. I always sort of use Germany as my market because they're a wonderful reading market, and they do seem to like my writing. And then actually it was a conversation with my lovely agent, Greg, who I think is here as well. Hello, Greg. About what I would write next. And I said, well, look, you know, if the Germans are interested in a third one, and if they're prepared to sort of, you know, sign me up for a third one, I'll write a third one. And then they did. And then, of course, now I had a problem because I hadn't kind of thought through, you know, what it was I was doing. Of course, they want a success like the first book. The problem is that first book is kind of light in a lot of ways. It's light, and it doesn't have the gravitas of the book I have written now, because I was not that person back then. I've lived way more years than I was. I think I wrote that book when I was 37. I'm now 53. So I am no longer the person that wrote Secret Mother's Business. And I, you know, as much as there is some humor in Unbecoming, this book it's not light. It is facing the darkness. It is very seriously facing the darkness. And so it is not for everybody. And I would say if you are a certain age and you have young children, perhaps it's not for you. I would recommend Secret Mother's Business for now. You know, my daughter said, oh no, I should read this book. She's 23. I was like, not yet. Please don't read it yet. You know, I do feel like that I have crossed a certain personal threshold to have written it. And I think, it's kind of, there are times when I think it's quite a hard read and quite a confronting read, and it's because I think being this age is hard and confronting. I think when you're at our age, you have lived enough, you've lost enough, you've lost people you love, you may have lost a child, you've dealt with children, perhaps you've had mental illnesses, physical illnesses, you've maybe lost a spouse, you're dealing with a spouse who's got health issues, you yourself may have health issues. You know, it's not a romp anymore, you know, and so to write a book like that was still holding some of the energy of Secret Mother's Business was it was just a real challenge. And that's why I think this book, that's one of the reasons why it was so hard to write.
And midlife, so you wanted to write about midlife?
I think I feel compelled to write about it. Frankly, I think women in particular in midlife are like the most interesting creatures on the planet right now, apart from like 14-year-old girls. They are like the most interesting humans around, and the most underrated and undervalued. And that I find completely fascinating. I mean, I just, you know, the older I've become, I've just realized how, as we become so-called invisible in this time, the power and the mystery and the strength and the compassion and the hearts of women, I think, is what is literally the glue that holds this planet together. You know, that women in their midlives who finished raising children are like 90% of the people who do all the volunteering in this world to save animals, save the whales, save the forests. It's done by women with gray hair and saggy boobs. Those are the people that are doing the work, you know. And so, wow, like, why wouldn't you want to write about these people? They are amazing.
And with there, I was thinking of the themes in the book. There's lots of themes. Did you have like this has to be in the book? This is a theme that I want to explore. Like, you definitely brought in climate change, you brought in the Me Too, were there things that were like, these things have to be in this story?
Well, you know, like with all the books, I didn't decide what the conversations were going to be. I spoke to women. And so I had lots and lots of conversations with women. Some of them were online. I created like a virtual get together for women. And I said, what are the things that you talk about with your girlfriends? What are the things that worry you? What are the things that, dominate your conversations. And we had these conversations. I had a couple of virtual nights with women who shared stories with me. I then went away with some of the women that are in this room. We spent 2 nights in a cave in the Blue Mountains, and we made a fire and we spoke about all kinds of things. I spent a night with a friend in the outback. She took me to the outback and we spent a night under the stars and we spoke. And I wanted to hear what women were talking about, and that's what all the books have done. I've drawn from real conversations that women are having. So it wasn't sort of me more saying this has to be in the book. It was more what I was gathering along the way and making notes. These are the things that women our age are thinking about, worrying about, concerned about, and talking about to each other.
Okay.
And those are some of the things. I mean, we're talking
Yes.
about climate change. We're talking about nurturing, caring for elderly parents. We're talking about, you know, our relationships with our husbands. We're talking about our anxiety about our children. We're talking about not being the first generation that doesn't have grandchildren because so many of our children are choosing not to have kids. I mean, these are things that we are talking about. You know, the Me Too movement, all of this kind of stuff is the stuff that women our age are talking about and worrying about.
Okay. I'd love you to read some of the book. No, I don't think has anyone read the book? So we've sort of kept this interview according to that. So we're not going to give anything away, but we have chosen a passage.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Do you want to maybe tell them a little bit about what the book is about? Maybe just in case some people haven't bought the book and maybe want to buy it.
What do you want?
Well, yeah. Well, so look, the book is really just about a woman in midlife who sort of finds herself at a crisis where her 2 young adult children have made decisions that she can't understand. They've just made decisions that she feels have excluded her, are not in line with how she's parented them. And so she doesn't see herself reflected at all in these young adults, and her relationship with her husband, which has always been throughout the books, a beautiful, happy kind of marriage. I didn't want to, you know, write about unhappy marriages because I myself am in a happy marriage. Is, you know, it's kind of sort of sagging. There's like a feeling of it sagging, you know, a little bit. And she's at a point now where she just doesn't know what she wants to do with her life. So she takes herself off on a 3-month sabbatical from her marriage, where she just goes away to try and reset herself. What does she want out of life? And during this time, she bumps into one of the women from the first night, Secret Mother's Business, whom she hasn't seen in like 15 years. And that woman has just become widowed. And that friend invites her to come away with her on a night to walk in for a day's hike into the Australian wilderness. And they're going to spend a night under the stars, her and some of her girlfriends, because it's her 57th birthday and they want to celebrate, and it's going to be silent and sacred and everything. And she said, yes, all right, I'll come with. So that's the premise of the book, is that they go off into the bush together, and when they get there, what happens during that time. I want to say this book is not big on plot. There's not a lot that
That's why we can do a reading and have an interview.
Right. There's not a lot that happens here.
But so much happens.
Yeah. Well, the thing that I think is interesting about that is that I think we have this addiction to a certain idea of plot. Mm-hmm. And it's a very kind of conventional idea of plot. And this book, I think, challenges what we understand by what happens, you know. What is, when we say that something happens to us, what do we mean? What does it mean to change your mind? What does it mean to fall out of love with your life, or fall out of love with the person that you become, or to take yourself away from a marriage that you've spent your life creating, or whatever it may be, you know. Somebody doesn't have to have an affair. Somebody, you know, it doesn't have to be those particular plot points that we normally think have to happen in storytelling. That whole sort of Campbellian, or, you know, the hero's journey thing, it's quite a sort of patriarchal paradigm, and this is sort of this is more women's storytelling, I feel. So anyway, I'm happy to read this. You want me to read that paragraph? That chapter? Yeah. Oh, I'm happy to read that. Okay. All right, here we go. The morning after I heard about CJ is one of her friends, I went down to the beach for my morning swim. I pulled my pink cap over the bob of my ponytail, fixed my goggles, and dived into the water, heading straight for the island. I'd been staring at that little piece of earth they call Wedding Cake Island for years, wondering what was there on that rocky outcrop peeking up through the ocean 800 meters from the shore. It reminded me of my favorite Enid Blyton book, Five Run Away Together. Some days it looked within easy reach, on others as far away as never. That day, I did not tell Frank where I was going. I did not consult the other swimmers on whether it was a good day to be swimming out so far and so deep. I propelled my body through the water, looking up every 10 or 20 strokes to make sure I was heading in the right direction. I did not think about the sharks or the stingers or the dangers I couldn't see. As I approached the island, I turned in the water and looked back at the beach. It was a miniature land, a shrunken picture of where I'd been staring at Wedding Cake Island all this time. But it had been gazing back at me. Right then, as thinking settled into me, as I came to know where I was, I began to panic, swallow salt water, sense peril. I could drown right there and no one would know. I could be gone, just like CJ. Tears filled my goggles. I felt the swell and sway of the water beneath me, and I swam back to my life on the shore with a strength I'd never previously possessed. Not then, but later, it shocked me that I could be so disloyal to my personality, do things I've always told myself I couldn't because I was too startled, frail, needed if anything should teeter horribly wrong. But I had been there, out in the darkest of blue waters without thinking myself out of, fuck it, I'm going. For that hour, as I'd alternated between freestyle and breaststroke, I wasn't me anymore. I was her, that other self I might have been if I hadn't been chastened into safety and proximity to the shore, just in case. I was not the jittering what-ifer who stays between the flags, dons the life vest, and never swims alone. I dropped the existential audit and grabbed the moment without double-checking to make sure it was sutured with sufficient guarantees and warranties. When I stumbled out of that water, pickled with brine and studded with seaweed, nestled, I discovered hours later in the shower, even in my belly button, I was wild and wondrous with dehiscence from all I knew. Something was peeling back, and I wanted to see what part of me I incarcerated every time I shrank. Who else was I beside the responsible, respectable mother of two who always put her children first? Suddenly, I wanted to be unfastened, unaccountable to anything or anyone, only to answer to the flicker in me pulsing. Go, go, go.
I reread that today and I got very emotional. Yeah,
Did you?
It's one of my favorite parts, I have to say. And I think I remember when I'm a mother as well, and I remember when I had children, when I first had children, realizing that I was going to always put my seatbelt on. Like I wasn't going to do a little drive somewhere without my seatbelt, you know, not around the corner. There was no risk, no chances anymore. And I'm not even wearing it. I'm wearing it for me, but it's for them. Right?
Yeah.
And so that scene, I mean, it brought back all the times that what you do and what you give up on to just be that in that role.
And you don't realize, that's the thing, is like as a mother, you don't realize that all these things that you're doing are kind of like not for you. They're not for you. And for me, I mean, I just 2 years ago started ocean swimming. Like it's something that people are like, you, Joanne, ocean swimming, because people who've known me, you know, can't reconcile this kind of neurotic, anxious person with somebody who will now swim like 100 meters from shore and, you know, encounter, as I have, massive sea life, various forms of sea life on this time. And there's a kind of way in which I'm sort of like, I don't sort of know who I am myself. Like, you know, my father said to me the other day, like, aren't you scared of sharks? And I was like, yeah, I am scared of sharks, but I'm going to swim anyway. And that kind of like incoherence of my own self feels quite exciting, because there's a way in which when you're a mother, there is no incoherence. Like you have got to be, if you are an incoherent mother, what you're doing is you are fucking your children up, basically. You've got to be very stable and very clear and follow through. And if you say something, you've got to mean it. And if you're going to have a boundary or a punishment, you must follow through. You can't just be like, oh yeah, no, but I sort of am at that point now where I'm like, yeah, oh yeah, and maybe I'll do this, and if I don't feel like it, I'll change my mind and I'll do that, and too bad if you don't like it, too bad if you don't understand. Like there's this part of me that's just like feels completely liberated from having to make any kind of sense. I suppose this is why women of our age are considered quite mad, because it is a kind of a flamboyant madness to sort of just be unhinged from any sense of what is the responsible or respectable thing to do. I love it.
Well, for me, like if I had to describe what Unbecoming is, it's that passage,
Yeah.
For me, like that's just a personal,
okay.
That for me was that Unbecoming.
Right. Well, it is also just that sort of what I love about it is just that where you sort of catch yourself sort of going, I don't know who I am, It's well enough when other people sort of look at you and can't understand you, but when you don't understand yourself, that's really fun. And I do feel like, there are things that I feel I have permission to do now that I've never given myself permission to do before, because I'm not saying I'm taking big risks or anything. Trust me, the swimming that I do is not, it's really nothing to get too, scared about what I do.
It's past the net, Jo.
There are no nets really.
That's yes.
Right.
Where you go.
Yeah. But I do swim where there are normally lifeguards usually, and I am careful. I'm not being uncareful, but I feel also sort of when I got to 50 that there was I felt this huge relief that sort of nobody could ever mourn that I died young. Like they would only ever be able to say, shame, she was so middle-aged, if I died, like so middle-aged. And of course that seems very irreverent, especially for people who have died in their 50s, because I have lost friends in their 50s and it was way too young, like way, way, way too young. But I'm just saying for myself, I just feel like I've been given such bounty. I've had children, I've swum in the ocean, I've had a wonderful marriage. I feel like I've had lots. This is my 13th book. I have had more than enough, and anything that I have now just feels like extra, like bonus material. And so when you sort of feel like you're in that realm of bonus material, I just feel like you sort of feel like you have more permission, because they're not things I'm ticking off anymore. Like, must have children and, pay off the mortgage and all these kinds of things. It just all feels a little bit more up for grabs. I feel up for grabs, if you know what I mean.
I do. Yeah. Now, the Australian bush is pretty much the mise en scène for this book.
Right.
And I was thinking, it's fantastic. I love that you've chosen that, but really you could have gone to Paris. You could have gone and, there were so many things you could have done in midlife with no children, and the children are grown up.
Yep.
You could have set this book anywhere.
Right.
And you chose the Australian bush, and I would love to know why.
Well, actually, the very first draft of this book was actually set in Tuscany.
Oh, there you go. I love Zara.
It was her and her friend meeting up in Tuscany with their teenage daughters, and I wrote about 40,000 words of that book and gave it to an editor who said it's kind of just not working. And I sort of knew it. I might try and get back to that version of the thing that I wrote, but I then really had to work out what was this book about. And for the very first time, the sense of going out into the wild, like the sense of the setting, felt like probably the most important character in this book. And I'm sure that has got to do with how pressingly I feel this desperation around what's happening to the natural environment and the climate. It just feels like there is nothing one can or should be saying these days that does not hold what is going on in the environment at the center of it all. There is nothing to say, nothing to become, nothing to be that does not understand that our world is in terrible peril. So what could I do with these characters but to push them out into that environment? And I want to tell you, doing that was not easy either, because when I sent them out into the wild in the first draft, they were walking straight into the bush and they were going towards a waterfall, and there was a whole theme around the waterfall and everything. Then, of course, we had the Australian bushfires, and no sensible Australian woman in her midlife would be walking into a bush where you would be surrounded by bush and there was no escape. So I changed that, and they were going to walk after the bushfires towards the ocean, through the bushfire ravaged bush to the ocean. And so at least on at the ocean, where there's this cave, and this particular setting, and this is what took so long, was to try and find the place and set it in the right way. It was going to happen after the Australian bushfires in that setting. And then, of course, COVID happened, so it couldn't happen like that, right? So every time I wrote it, something happened in the environment that was like, well, that won't work. So it is set just before the Australian bushfires. And I say that in the preface so that as the reader, you know something the characters don't know, that this world that they are entering into, this wild, beautiful place that they're entering to, is going to be destroyed by bushfires. And it's like that thing that we know as the readers that the characters don't know, that also holds a certain level of tension for us, because I feel as well as if we have children, that we also have a kind of foreboding about a future that we probably won't live to see, but that our children will. And it's that tension that we are forced to reckon with at this time, you know, and there isn't a kind of easy feeling about that. And so I don't think that I wanted that tension to be present in the book. And so the Australian bush, because of the bushfires, because this is now where I live, and because it's been so hard for me to find a sense of belonging and a sense of home, because I am an immigrant to this country, and I always feel like split. I always feel half somewhere and half somewhere else, like that this was like my homecoming, my embracing of this land as my new home, and also kind of my sort of grief statement about what happened to the land during the bushfires, and probably what is going to continue to happen here if we don't do something very quickly.
Yeah, I was thinking, I've got hope and grief here in bold, because I actually felt like that was kind of what you were going between, hope and grief, hope and grief. And I did Google this, Joe, for you, but Mary Oliver, who I know we both love, said something in an interview about wanting to leave her readers with hope, with something, leaving them with something. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to know what I mean, I don't want to say it's a hard book, but it's big. Yes.
I think maybe it is quite a challenging book.
I mean, hope and grief, that's definitely for me. And right. I wrote afterwards to someone, I felt like I was sort of still stuck between my throat and my chest, because I was holding on to a lot going with you and all the characters through it. And then I have to sort of go by myself afterwards with the book. But what was your intention to leave us with? I mean, do you have an intention with these books that you want to give us something?
Well, I've always sort of written towards the light. That's how I've taught my writers to, you know, in all the writing courses I've done. I've always, I say that, you know, that is where you should aim. Like, what is your writing, what vision of life is your writing in service to? I think if you don't have that as your, you know, the fuel that is pushing you into the writing, it can become very dark. And I definitely, I certainly didn't want to sort of smother people with a sense of hopelessness in this book. I don't think that is the case. I think if you have children, you're wired for hope. You can't but have a sense of hope. You must do that. And I think really what I wanted readers to feel was the responsibility that we have as elders, the responsibility we have to the younger generation to really hold space for them while they navigate into the future. And they are so much better than we are anyway. I mean, they really are a kind of a very enlightened generation. That gives me a lot of hope. It's one of the reasons why, and I know you did want to talk about the young backpacker that sort of gate crashes. Yeah, I will say that. I mean,
I think she's a very important part of the book.
She is a very important part of the book. So for me, I did want to have the voice of the younger generation. And I at one point thought about one of the women bringing her daughters with, or her stepdaughter with, and her being the voice of that younger generation. But then in the end, I decided that I wanted to disappear all the children. I didn't want any of their particular children in there, because they're all dealing with their children who've gone. But I did want to hear from this younger generation. So this young backpacker comes and sort of stumbles into, I'm not giving anything away. As I said, the book is not big on plot. You know it all from reading the blurb, what actually happens. But she sort of is this voice that is talking from a place that these women are not. She's very different. She's texturally very different from each of them. And she sort of inspires each of them in a different way, raises things for them. Some of them see themselves in her, some of them don't see themselves in her, some of them see their daughters or what they wish their daughters were like in her. And so she is, a very important part of this conversation. I mean, just as a kind of anecdote that's just popping into my head, I just recently took a road trip of my own up the coast in the last couple of weeks, and I was stopping at all the beaches to swim, and I came to this one beach and I was looking for an ocean bath, and it was disgusting and overgrown and everything, so I decided I would swim on this unpatrolled beach. And as I sort of got into the water, I felt that there was quite a strong rip, and so I was kind of paddling in the shallows, and I probably looked like I was struggling a little bit, but I wasn't. I was very much I'm in control. But there were these 3 young 14-year-old girls who were standing up at the ocean bath, and they were kind of watching me do this. They were watching, and I could see them watching me for a while doing this. They were like 14. And at one point, one of them called out, "Hey!" I was like, "Yes, are you okay?" She said, "Are you okay over there?" And I thought to myself, there you have it. These 14-year-old girls are going to come and save me if I was like in trouble, caught in a rip. And it felt to me like such a metaphor for this younger generation, these young girls, sassy, completely in control. "Hey, old woman, you struggling over there in that rip? Do you want us to come pull you out over there?" I just had that feeling. And in a way, I just felt that a bit about, the character Emily in this book, that she is this voice that that comes to speak to them from the future in a way.
Yeah, and that's an author's choice to have that character. So you definitely wanted that in the book.
Everything in this book was my choice.
I know.
That's the last thing about writing a book. You kind of do get to choose.
No one made you.
Nobody made me. No, exactly. Nobody made me.
And what was the hardest thing? I mean, I was thinking, is the emptiness thing the hardest? Because it's all about motherhood, right? I mean, the 3 books, that's the kind of unifying. Was emptiness the sort of,
definitely like letting go of your children has got to be like, for mothers like me, I mean, probably like the most difficult separation. Like it's just almost like trying to like separate pieces of your personality, like say, okay, we won't have this but here, we won't have this but there, we'll take this part out of you. It's like literally trying to separate who you are out of yourself, and so you're constantly doing counterintuitive things, like when your child says, "I'm going to go to Paris for a year," and your heart goes like this, and you find yourself going, "That's wonderful." And you can feel like your heart breaking, and then you saying something that is going like opposite the grain of who you are. That is so hard. Like I feel you have to wean yourself off these people who literally are so entwined in who you are. But I have to say as well, God, what a fucking relief it is actually when it happens. What a relief. I suddenly look at my children and I'm like, I'm not responsible. Like, I'm not responsible for what you do. You can make your mistakes and they are yours. And I used to feel so like judged, like that I'd been a bad mother when my kids, like, made mistakes, or they made decisions, or they did things that seemed wrong or whatever. Now I'm just like, this is your job, this is your life, like go and do it, and I'll be here if you like need to discuss it, but please go and do it. And like the best thing for me, absolute best thing for me is like, it was my birthday recently, and my 2 adult children, my husband took me away somewhere, and my 2 adult children drove down, and they met me. They came and they drove and they met me there. And my daughter had to leave early the following morning to go to work, and my son and I sitting on the beach, and he goes, "I just need to do my meditation, Mum. Do you want to join me?" And I was like, I'd love to join you in your meditation. Like, I've been meditating since I was like 25 and tried to get them to meditate, and it was all like, God, we're not into all that spiritual shit, mum. But now at 21, he's discovered meditation, and there I got to see him, this choice that he's made, that this is something that he wants to do with his life, and here I was allowed to participate in it. And I sort of lay there on this beach doing this meditation thinking like, I'm good. I'm done. I think I'm done here. I think I can sort of safely say, yeah, I'm checking out of here, you know. So it's you know, there are so many beautiful things that you get to experience as well. And I think that that's what we have to focus on, because there is so much pain in letting go. But if you focus on that, it will swallow you. It will take you down. So you do not get swallowed. You got to come up, you swim back to shore, you swim back to that place, you know. And so I wanted to leave my readers with a sense of exciting possibilities and a sense of what wildness they may yet have in them that has not ever been allowed to be expressed, that maybe could come alive now, you know. Yeah, I think that's,
yes. I think, yeah, midlife, you've got this whole other.
Right. I mean, the other thing, though, that the other theme of this book, of course, is just this marriage that she's trying to decide whether she's going to stay in or not. And the thing about this marriage is that it is a happy marriage. This is not a marriage where there's been infidelity or there's been, well, I won't say more about that, but like, this is not a marriage where there's, you know, these two people who love each other, they've raised these children well. It's not that traditional idea of, you know, you just find yourself in this terrible marriage with someone. These are two people who love each other and who've been through so much together and everything. And yet, there's just that, and yet, like, do I still want to do this? And honestly, I personally believe that if a woman or anyone gets to the stage of their lives and they're not at least considering the, you know, and yet, I'm wondering what, you know, what the trade-off is for that, because you get yourself back in a way that you hadn't anticipated at this age. And I think with that comes the opportunity for such deep self-inquiry that does not include a partner. It does not include somebody that you have made a vow to 20 years ago or 15 years ago or whatever. It comes with a complete sense of facing yourself, because you are each facing your own mortality at this stage, for sure. We have to be, we're at that point. A lot of us are dealing with elderly parents. We're dealing with our parents' mortality. This should be part of the internal conversation, and it is definitely part of the internal terrain that I don't think is part of the territory of Secret Mother's Business and the reunion when your children are small. Those are things you do not talk about or think about at all. Whereas now, and I think, one can think about them in a way that feels meaningful and not morbid and terrifying. I just think, and it also, I think, allows you to take greater risks, when you're not constantly, censoring yourself with fear, which feels to me like how I lived my entire life as a young mother. Just fear was just always, that was always in front of me. And it would be, I would always do the thing that was the least scary and the least, that would cause the least peril to anybody, and I had to be okay, and my children had to be okay. Comes a certain point in your life where you just understand that you have no idea what tomorrow is going to bring. And you also know you will survive whatever tomorrow brings. As much as you don't want to contemplate it, you will survive it. And every woman in this book is navigating a terrible loss, every single one of them. And as those stories come out, we start to understand the ways in which we all hold, navigate, and digest grief, and also transmute it into joy and fun and laughter and connection. And I think having girlfriends and is one way in which we really find that juiciness of life, that no matter how old you are, no matter your level of mobility, no matter, you can still be on your deathbed and have a good old belly laugh with a friend, and a friend will cook you a beautiful meal. and will come and visit you when you are ill, and will, you know, take out your garbage. I mean, there is just so much richness at this time of life, and our girlfriends are, you know, the most invisible and undervalued resource that we have for our personal happiness. So I hope that people will feel that way, and maybe some people will decide that they would like to go and spend a night out in the wild with some girlfriends, you know.
Definitely. Yes. Now, I just want to make sure, how are we going with the questions? Are there any coming up on Zoom?
Lots of comments but no questions.
Okay. Any questions in the room? It's hard if you haven't read it. I get it.
Are you going to start doing Unbecoming tours?
What would they involve, Joe? It is a good idea.
Well, I have already with some of the women in this room. We did do some of that as part of the research, but I would actually love to spend, I actually love spending time with women, groups of women, and I would love to spend time out in nature with women. I mean, you know, when I came to stay with you, how I took off all my clothes and stood under a waterfall, right? All my clothes. It was honestly in July. It was cold. It was cold.
Where is this?
It was in the Southern Highlands. But it was just like, you know, I mean, I would love opportunities to do more like things like that. I thought, you know, that was fun. So I mean, you and I can chat about it later. It might be a good business idea.
Well, I've got more questions.
Yes, go for it.
So, okay, so these are part memoir, part fiction. I mean, there is some of Jo, and you've called her Jo, your main character.
Because the first book was Jo, and based on, you know, a real night, and that first Secret Mother's Business came out as narrative nonfiction. So can you see, like, I was really constrained, constrained by some of that. I mean, yeah, that's true.
That's true. So you had to carry that through.
I had to carry that all
and how does that feel as a writer?
Well, it was very tricky, and that's why this book was so hard to write, was because, you know, I have changed so much as a person from that first book. And one of my very dear friends, Ilse, I don't know if she's here, but she read the book and she said to me, you know, she's so much quieter in this book. I mean, there is silence in this book, so that's kind of different from the other two books, but there is a way in which I feel like this book allows, she's become much more introspective, and the voices of the other women can really come forward. And I think that is also a function of age, where you sort of, you don't have to be the center of attention. You don't have to, you know, be the focal point of everything. You can really be in a place and allow other voices, and you're not in this competitive, bitchy, nasty sort of frame of mind, which you might be as a younger woman. Actually, one of the things I did want to say, Miriam, is that I had a few inspirations for this book, and the one was that movie Wine Country that came out. When I saw Wine Country, it was coming out, I was like so excited, because it's a story about women in their 50s going away, and I love Tina Fey and Amy Poehler and everything, and
I remember you writing about it.
I hated that movie so much. I was actually enraged by the end of it, that they would create a movie about women in their 50s behaving in the most juvenile, pathetic, nonsensical ways that you would expect teenagers to be. Women who are, you know, trying to have sex with, you know, young men, and concerned about things that I'm just like, well, I certainly don't know women in their 50s who behave like this. And I swore that my book would be filled with very different women, because the women that I know at this age are full of grace and wisdom, and you know, have such depth of spirit and character. And so the point was to create a book full of these kinds of women. Created a kind of a storytelling problem, because in story you want conflict, and you want antagonists, and you want people that are irritating and, you know, cause conflict and whatever. But I didn't want any of them to be like that, because all the women that I know are not like that. So to remove bitchiness and conflict and that sort of thing from the dynamic, which was present in the previous two books,
was first.
Yes, exactly. Judgment,
lots of
criticism of what she's doing, how she's mothering, blah, blah, blah. This book has got none of that, right? There is such a sense of, I wanted there to be a sense of such compassion for the choices and the mistakes that others have made and oneself has made. So that was really tricky. So all the conflict had to be internal conflict, right? There couldn't be this, like, I didn't want her to be going away with like a group of women that she actually can't stand, and that women who are behaving in ways that would cause conflict, because I just, it's not my experience of women, you know. So that was also a tricky business. So what causes the conflict?
Where the conflict moments? Right. The backstory was very strong for each character.
Well, that was the thing, was that like the backstories of each character became the thing because of that James Hollis quote, that who you have become is now your biggest obstacle. So every woman is navigating and trying to, you know, deal with that, who she's become. And that's her obstacle. But yet in this group of kind, wise women who've had different life experiences, she hears something that she's needed to hear, that maybe she hasn't been able to hear before. Just in that space, she kind of gets something that she's needed to hear. And that's what I wanted, because I think when women sit around together like that, and really you open the space for that, these voices and stories start to come out. And I've never been in a room where there haven't been tears, and there haven't been hugs, and people don't sort of emerge sort of feeling like sisters at the end of that. So that was the feeling that I wanted people to have, you know.
And do you think choosing, because all 3 books happen in a very short space of time, is that also?
Yes, it's a kind of like a pressure cooker, and it's a, you know, a very focused period of time. But of course, that's just the plot. That's just the front story. Of course, all the backstories and the way I've woven the backstory. I mean, that for me was just what was so tricky, was how to weave the backstory, when to reveal certain things. I mean, that in writing is called the structure of revelation, and how you structure that so that the reader also catches a surprise and starts to understand the main character more as bits of her backstory start to trickle out. And I do want secrets and, you know, things to happen where you're like, okay, makes sense, because I think that's what happens. We judge people, and then somehow you have a conversation and you go, I understand now, I get it, I understand.
And that was very big in this book,
especially
compared to the other 2.
Right.
This real listening, I felt like there was a lot of listening and a lot of unearthing. And sort of everyone waiting for that unearthing and then sort of leaning in.
Yes.
You know, that was the general feeling.
Oh, good. Well, that was what I aimed for. So I'm glad I know that I got there.
Okay, anyone have another question here? Oh, Jordan.
Oh,
and we've got one in the room as well, but we'll get this online one.
So Susan has asked, do your husband and children see themselves in characters?
The best question.
I would imagine that they do. My husband always reads, you know, drafts of the book, and he's quite sort of practical about these things. I remember when I wrote Secret Mother's Business, and, you know, there's also sex in all these books as well. I always write about sex and the different eras of sex that you have at different stages of your life. And I was sort of saying to him, are you okay with this? And he was like, I don't care. Just, you know, like he had a very masculine response, you know, as long as Frank has a big penis, it doesn't matter, you know, who cares, you know. And so it's just, I mean, he was joking, of course, but like the thing is they have good sex, you know, they're happily married. It's not a problem. It's just like, what's going on for her, you know, what is actually going on for her. So he's been very, very supportive always. He's always just said, if it sells, it's fine. It's just fiction anyway, you know. But for my kids, you know, I obviously have drawn stuff from their personalities and from some of the things that they've done. Like my son at one point was talking about going into the Australian army, like a long time ago. But so in this book, he's decided he's going into the army, right? Because, you know, there was a time when I was like, when he said this, and I was like, okay. And I sort of had to sit with this, and I was like, the army? Like where did that come from? That's like, that was not from me. Like, I don't know how that came through. So I've used that, and I've drawn bits and pieces from conversations with my daughter, but I've actually fictionalized. They're fictional characters. So I don't know if that answers the question, but you know, yeah.
Have the kids read it?
No, and I don't want them to. I don't think that this is a book for young people, frankly. I even for young mothers, to be honest. I think it's for older women. I do think it's for older people, this book.
And what about women in their 70s?
Yeah, I think if you've crossed a certain threshold, it's a bit like the Kabbalah. Don't they say you have to be over 40 before you can study the Kabbalah? Well, you have to be over 50 to read Unbecoming.
Over 50?
Yeah.
I'm not.
Oh, you're not. Oh, Miriam.
Oh,
dear. You
I'm
got
okay,
it, though. You're quite mature, though, for your age, Miriam.
She invited me to go into that cave, so I don't know how old you think I am. Okay. Any more questions? Or we'll go in the room.
Yeah, sure. Hope I can get this out okay. I'm a bit nervous.
Don't be nervous.
Sorry.
No, don't be nervous.
It's not what I do. But I'm just curious to know, because I'm a 50-year-old woman, just turned 50, and I have young children. I've got a 10 and 7-year-old.
Wow.
And I can some of what I've heard from the book, I can really relate to. There's a sort of an unraveling of my life right now, which is really enjoyable and fantastic. But I feel like sometimes I sort of take that into my children's lives, where I'm not maybe as not that I'm not dedicated to my children and put them first.
Of course not.
But I can feel myself sort of standing up for myself a little bit.
Yeah.
And I wonder if the Jo in Unbecoming could do, the Jo in the first book could do with a dose of Jo from Unbecoming.
Sure.
Do you think I should tame that, like unraveling and unbecoming?
Oh, you're asking my advice. Okay, so here's a wonderful thing about being my age is that I have no advice to offer anyone. I would never judge anybody for anything that they've done or the way they do. I would just say trust yourself. Like that is, I think, the most. It's so hard though, I think, when you're a young mother, because there is just so much like unnecessary feedback that everybody feels entitled to give you about what you're doing. It's so hard to trust yourself.
You could be an old mother and still feel that too.
Right, I'm sure. No, I think when you've got small children, that's how you feel, is that people are judging you. Now, I don't care if people judge me anymore, because I'm done with doing my mothering duties, and if you want to judge my personality now, or feel, that's fine. But I definitely think being an older mother I think you should write something about being an older mother, because I think that must be in and of itself a very interesting experience. I haven't had that, so I don't know what it's like. For me, by the time I turned 50, my kids were well into their late teens, so I'm sure your experience would be really interesting. You're probably a much better mother for having had your life experience, because I think the greater maturity we have, the more a deeper sense of who we are as a parent, the less we kind of inflict ourselves on our children, which is, I think, one of the things that we can do, which can quite squash them, as opposed to just kind of like allowing them to become who they need to be. I think you can much more separate yourself. I can separate myself now from my children a little bit better than I was able to do when they were small. I was totally entangled in them before. So I don't know how you feel, if you feel entangled in them or you feel a bit more able to.
It's hard to know.
Yeah, it is hard to know.
Yeah.
Did you read Reunion? Have you read the other two books? No.
Okay.
Yeah, so start at the beginning. Start at the beginning. That's my advice.
Yeah. I think, maybe start at the beginning.
Start at the beginning. Anyone online?
Yes, we have one from Lauren who says, Jo, what would you say is the biggest difference between men and women at middle age?
With all the love and respect to all the men who are here, and I also think this is generalizing, which is a shocking thing to do. With all of that said, I think, as a horrible generalization, one can say that in midlife, I think men become more conservative and grumpier, and women become more progressive open-spirited, open-minded, and loose in a kind of way. I think men become more fixed and women become looser. And so that can cause, sometimes I think, you know, can cause a little bit of tension, or it can be a lovely little dance of opposites, you know. I think, I don't know. It's hard to really have a really good conversation. I haven't had a lot of good conversations with men in midlife. I find women very, very, very interesting at midlife. And I have to say a lot of the men at midlife I find a bit dull. But that's not the men that are in this Zoom meeting, not them, other men I have found, and it's just a horrible generalization. So I look forward to having more interesting conversations with men at midlife so that I can answer that question.
And they can all message you after,
They can all message me
yes.
afterwards. Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, terrible generalization, but I mean, it was the only way to answer the question. Lauren, sorry, and to all the men, sorry.
Yeah, well, I want to, oh yeah, okay.
Yeah. I've got a little bit of a writing question.
Yes.
Because I know that you have written a lot, that you teach writing, and you run a business. And so I'm really interested in your process of writing, because, you know, sometimes I feel like it takes me so long to actually get in the zone to write that I've run out of time. Whereas, you know, you're also active and engaged in the community. So you've got all these kind of balls in the air, and yet you still find time to write. That's the first part of the question. The second part of the question is, can you actually write as a writing teacher and a very experienced writer? Can you write just kind of in a really flowy way, or are you kind of editing as you write by the time you get to your level of experience?
Gosh,
sorry.
No, it's fine. It's sort of like trying. No. I know that there are, you know, it's so interesting to try and talk about the writing process, and I haven't really talked about the writing process for so long because I haven't taught writing at least for a year, while I took time off to write this book. So so the first part of the question was about how I
you actually find space and time in your life.
And time. Well, I don't have to look after children anymore. And so, you know, irrespective of how much space I have in the day, you know, I will generally just use that time to after I've had a swim in the ocean, I will then just generally use that time to write. It's, I guess, the same as like any kind of job that you would do. If you know you have to go to work and you have to be there a certain number of hours a day, I would probably sort of sit and try and get some writing done. But having said that, I mean, I'm very erratic, and there'd be times, and this book was so hard to write, I complained endlessly to my poor husband about it, because I would sometimes write in spurts. Like the piece I read to you now, I wrote almost like in one sitting. I hardly edited it at all. And then there were other pieces that just took so long, and each character took so long to form in my consciousness, and her voice took so long, you know, as well. And her backstory took so long. And I had all these spreadsheets of, you know, because I wanted to make sure that I was representing different voices and different elements and different, you know, spiritual ideas and all sorts of things. So every character kind of is in some way, the small little bit of an archetype of from a different way of thinking. So, you know, in the end, kind of, Kincham, I think that sometimes when a book comes together, I'm almost like amazed that it has. I'm like, oh, you know, like, I'm not sure how that all came together, right? Because there was so long where I was just like, oh, I'm just not quite there, and I'm just not quite there, and I'm not quite there. And then, honestly, sometimes it's you catch a sort of like a feeling or a tone or a voice, and if you can hold on to it and then sort of weave it all the way through, you pull the whole thing together like that. And until that happens, you know that you haven't got it right yet. And that's what took so long in this book. I knew it wasn't quite right. I knew it wasn't quite right. Even when I sent it to my editor, it came back and it came back. And it was only during like that final rewrite that I suddenly felt like I had pulled it together. And at that point, you are literally weighing every single word, not just every, paragraph or every chapter or every sentence. I'm weighing every single word, reading the thing aloud, hearing how it sounds, hearing how it falls. And that's what takes so long. That's what took me so long with this book. It just took a very long time, and it was very hard, and I don't think I'm going to write another book.
When did you actually finish writing this? Like, was it during COVID?
When was it? It was like earlier this year. Yeah, I think it was. It was maybe just before, I think. I did the rewrite. I don't even remember. Yeah, I think it was earlier this year. Yeah, it really took a very, very, very long time. But the whole thing took like 3 years, the longest it's ever taken me to write anything. And I'd already written the 40,000 words of that first draft that just didn't go anywhere. So, it was hard. Please buy lots of copies.
Anyone else do it? Another good. Okay. So, well, my final question really is, you say it's a trilogy.
Yes. Oh, is there going to be a fourth one?
You can't really say, can you?
No, I have absolutely no idea, because the thing is, you don't know if you're going to be alive next year. So like, let's say I live like, another 10 years or whatever it may be, and I kind of get to a point where I don't know what could happen, but maybe, I don't expect there will be grandchildren, but let's say there are, and or my children grow up and do other things with their lives, which is one of the themes of this book as well. And I find myself at a different stage of life. I do think my girlfriends will be very, very, very central to my life at that point. I think our girlfriends it was one of the themes that when I spoke to women, that they talked about how important their girlfriends were. Who knows, Miriam, maybe we will, I don't know, maybe we'll go do something exciting and in a group of women, and there will be more to say. I do think there are lots of interesting things to say. And I do think that from here on in, what women have to say and what we think and the wisdom that we have is the medicine that the world needs. I do think that. I think we are the most interesting people on the planet, as I said, apart from 14-year-old girls. And so that's why I teach women to write, because I think their stories and their voices are so profound and so important, and yet women so underrate their experience, so underrate themselves. I think that, and I hope that that is going to change in the next era. I hope things are shifting and that women will start to be seen. We've seen Jacinda Ardern, we've seen what female leadership looks like. I do think women are leaders naturally. If you have run a family, you are a leader. You have, you've got leadership skills. And so I'd love to see all of that sort of rolling out in another way. So I don't think I'm going to write another book, Miriam. I think I'm tired.
I do, because it's going to be exciting. And I was thinking there was an article in Nicole Kidman on Good Weekend. I don't know if anyone read it on the weekend, but, she really talks about, she's 53, I think, as well. Actually.
Yeah, she's born in the same year.
Yeah, and she's just, talking about this age of women, and there's these women in film and TV who are rising up now, making their own production companies,
right.
So there's definitely now, there's the ability now to tell the stories with the money behind it and the the move behind it. So
absolutely. And look, that's why
another one.
That's why Karen McDermott and I started this. We've started a new literary imprint,
yes.
Lusaris. This is the first title in this literary imprint. But I mean, people are like, oh, you're starting a new literary imprint in COVID. It's such a bizarre thing to do. What a strange thing to do. But I mean, she is a remarkable woman with 6 children, by the way, and runs this incredible publishing house as well. I mean, honestly, you just ask women what they are doing in their day-to-day lives, not just what they're doing at work, but what they're doing at home and what they're doing with their children, what they're doing with their parents, and what they're doing here and what they're doing there. And what you will see are people who have these astonishing skills, like just remarkable, and very difficult to find an uninteresting woman in her midlife. So lots of conversations and bits of wisdom to be gleaned from all of that. So we'll see. I don't know, Miriam. I think there are other voices that need to be heard. I've really written enough.
Don't listen to that. All right, thank you, everyone. Thanks for being here. If anyone has a last question, we could take it. But if not, we're going to say goodbye to Zoom. I think they're all waving to you. I'm going to let Jo see a gallery view.
Oh,
everyone wave to Jo.
Everybody. Thank you all.
Just for a big round of applause for Jo.
Let's have a look. Hello, everybody. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Fascinating.
Did the video. Hang on. You're not all. There. Yeah, now you can see.
Thank you all for being there. There's my sisters. Oh my God,
You can't see.
Tanya and Bob and Lisa. Oh my God. Yeah, take a screenshot for me, Jordan, please. Thank you, everybody, for
You.
on.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you so
before
much.
we go, we just want to congratulate you on the launch of this beautiful book that we're very proud to see.
I'm just doing.
And you know, you and I, we've had a long time relationship. We've been working together many years now, and it's always been wonderful to sell your books.
Well, I've sent through.
Now you got a speech, Joe?
I think I've spoken more than enough, but thank you everybody for being here tonight in person, and those of you who tuned in online. Thank you so much. I would be so grateful if you would grab a copy or a couple of copies for some of your girlfriends, or sisters, and yeah, and definitely I'm very interested to know what men think of this book. My wonderful agent, he was the first man to read it, and he had such a beautiful response to the book. My husband Zed read it, and he cried at the end. So I mean, it's for everybody, I think. So I hope people will, help us to make a success of this book and a success of this imprint. And of course, if anybody out there is writing literary fiction and would like to submit a manuscript to Lusaris, I'm the commissioning editor, so you can submit it to me. I would be so excited to hear from you. So thank you everybody for being with me tonight. And Miriam, thank you for your wonderful questions, and as always, the one thing I did want to show people, Miriam, we forgot. So one of the very important pieces of paraphernalia in this book is a thing called a pee funnel. A pee funnel is a piece of plastic that helps you to pee standing up as a woman, and you affix the side to your girl parts and push hard so that there's no leakage space, and then but I have to say there's a lot of room for error here. It's a very exact science, and there are all sorts of factors, including kind of hair that can get in the way of a tight seam, because it has to be a kind of you have to create a kind of a proper suction here. Anyway, I did buy this and experiment with it because this pee funnel is a very important part of what happens in the book, or it gets used a lot in the book. And I wanted to just show you that it is actually a thing. It's a thing. There it is. That's the thing that it is.
Caroline.
It's so you don't have to squat while you wee. You can stand up, and it is a kind of an interesting sort of gender warping experience. I can see the appeal, frankly. I can see the appeal. So thanks everybody. Lots of love to you all, and thank you.
And
again.
we'll get